talking about today. This is the first lecture for Psych 250, uh, social psychology. This is a social psychology class. It's 256. Let's go over how you pass the class first of all. This is the syllabus right at the top of the assignments page. I'm not exactly sure what yours looks like. I've never really seen it. All I've seen is my own. And so this is what mine looks like. So let's go ahead and look at the syllabus. There we go. This is me. I'm Dr. Bruce M. Bradway. I live in Lost Nation, Iowa. I'm teaching online right now because of COVID protocols. I'm not sure I'm coming back. I think I'll probably be teaching online. If you need to get a hold of me, it says my office phone, but the reality is that's my cell phone. You can call me whenever if you need me. I do have office hours. It's Monday and Tuesday, 3 to 5 in the afternoon. Your time, I'm Central Time, you're Mountain Time, so this is 4 to 6 my time. And then on Wednesday and Thursday, it's in the morning. Mountain Time is 8 in the morning until 10 in the morning. My time is 9 to 11. And I'll be on Zoom, and this is the address right here. So if you need to talk to me about something, maybe something has offended you in the lecture, I've told a joke that wasn't very funny, you can get on Zoom and yell at me if you like, or whatever. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at, this is the book. We've been using this book for a while, and I'm thinking, oh no, this is the Aronson book. Okay. We've been using this book for a while, and that's true. But it's the Aronson book. There's the class schedule. We have 10 weeks in this class, and we will finish on the 4th of August. Today we're going to tackle 2 chapters, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Chapter 1 is an introduction to social psychology, and Chapter 2 deals with research in social psychology. Okay, so there's a quiz with each chapter. There are 13 quizzes, 15 points per quiz for 195 points. If you've ever taken a class from me before, you know that my quizzes aren't to test you. My quizzes are to help you review the information that I think is important in the chapter. So you can use your book, you can use your PowerPoints, you can Google it, you can ask your parents, you can ask your spouse, you can query your 2-year-old daughter. Really doesn't matter. I just want you to know the information, and that's why I give the quizzes, so that you go over this information one more time. You also need to write a 5-page paper with 5 references. This is 5 pages of text. A page of text is 23 lines. So if you get real smart and decide to triple space it instead of double space it, I'm still counting the lines, and it doesn't really matter how many spaces. You still need 23 lines. You'll still need, what is it, 115? I think it's 115 lines. 5 times 23, yeah, it's 115. Okay, so you need 115 lines in the paper. You have to use a 12 font, so it's not like you can use a 24 font or something. Anyway, okay, so students get tricky sometimes. Answering discussion questions. There will be a discussion question in each chapter. The answers to the discussion questions are not in the textbook. The questions, I try to ask you questions that delve into how you think and whether you're thinking. So that's really what I'm looking for. I do not grade for content. So if you say something really strange, it doesn't really matter. I'm just looking for information. Now it's got to make sense. Of course, it's got to make sense. But if you say that Freud was only 4 feet tall. I will correct you, but I will not count off for the fact that you didn't know that Freud was actually almost 6 feet tall. Not important anyway. And the one thing, this is social psychology, and this is really kind of interesting. What I want you to do is every week I want you to participate in social psychology research, and I'll show you how to get there in just a second. So the total number of points that you can accumulate in this class will be somewhere around 525 points. And so there you go. That's how you pass the class. That's how you get an A. You score more than 472 points. Of course, you have to take all the quizzes. You have to do the discussion questions, and you'll have to do the research. Now I'll show you how to get to the research. This is it right here. This is the website, Research Participation. It's a social psychology network. And let's go ahead and go there. I think I've already done this once just before. Let me go. There you go. Yeah. Okay, so this is the website. As you can see, it's that ugly color of yellow and green. They paint hospitals in these two ugly colors. I don't know. It makes me sick to my stomach, but that's not important. Okay, so you can choose any of these that you want to. You'll have to choose 10. You'll have to do 10 pieces of research. There's a certain type of information that I'm looking for. Okay. So you'll have to tell me what the name of it is, and you'll have to tell me who the author is, or who's conducting the research, and what institution they come from. And as you can see, it tells you all the institutions. And so if it looks interesting, go ahead and go ahead and do it. The research, a lot of different topics. Judgment, decision-making, psychology of the internet, personality and individual differences, beliefs and attitudes, social perception, interpersonal relationships, or you can go to student research. Interpersonal relationships, same thing. So you've got a whole list of things. You can either do student research, web experiment resources. No, you don't want to go to that. Okay, anyway, so there's lots to choose from, anything you want. Psychology of the Internet. I teach a class in the fall called Cinema Therapy, Social Media, and Alternative Platforms that deals with the psychology of the Internet, as curious as this is. Now, this is kind of interesting because if you look at who in the world is doing research on the Internet, there's one from Australia, there's a second one from Australia, there's one from England, the UK, there's another one from England, and then the fifth one is from the Quad Cities. Now the Quad Cities, I live about 30 miles north of the Quad Cities. The Quad Cities are Davenport, Iowa, Bettendorf, Iowa, Rock Island, Illinois, and Moline, Illinois. Those are the Quad Cities, and they're all kind of jammed together. But Western Illinois University in the Quad Cities is doing research, as weird as that is. So I guess that's not important. I was just curious. I hadn't even seen that before. So this is how you, well, you go to the syllabus and you can find the website. You'll have to do 10 of them during the semester, and there are pieces of information that I'm looking for from them. One of the things that you're going to learn by doing this research is how you do research. It's really kind of fascinating. We're going to talk about that in the second chapter. So there you go. Do you need 525 points to get an A plus? The due dates, I do not count off for late work. Even though I tell you you need to get your stuff in at this time, I will accept late work. I know stuff happens. I know stuff happens. And look at that, I got a signature from my dean. Isn't that great? Okay, anyway, I know stuff happens. Kids get sick. You've got ceremonies you have to go to, especially in the summertime, that last for days. And because of that, I don't expect you to miss the ceremony or not take care of your child or whatever. Or get sick yourself, my goodness, with all the COVID. My wife's cousin has just come down with COVID in Atlanta, Georgia. So we know that this stuff is still around. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started, I guess. If you have any questions, you can come to my office hours if you like. You don't have to. You don't ever have to talk to me. That's fine. I understand. It doesn't hurt my feelings. This class starts on the 30th of May, so that's a day after Memorial Day. Not that that's important. So let's go ahead and get started with Chapter 1, the Introduction to Social Psychology. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at a parable. And we need to understand that social psychology has to take place in context. So that's what we're going to be dealing with. Chapter 1, Introduction to Social Psychology. This is me. If you want to read my biography, I think I put a copy of it on the website. I'm old, been around for a while. I've been teaching on the Navajo Nation. This next year will be my 8th year teaching on the Navajo Nation. This is not my first powwow. I have taught on 2 other reservations, Fort Belknap up in Montana and the Flathead Reservation, Salish Kootenai College. I taught there for a year. But my wife and I are military, so we moved around a lot and saw lots of stuff. So, and I worked in medicine for 30 years, so all of that's in my biography. Interesting stuff. So let's start with a parable. Once upon a time, there was a young lady who was treated very badly by her evil stepmother. She wasn't allowed to wear makeup or go to any of the local parties. One day, after she was once again disappointed about a ball, her fairy godmother came to her and dolled her up for the party. And that's what she looked like before. And that's what she looked like after the fairy godmother got through with her. She went to the ball, and no one in her family recognized her. I mean, who would? That's what she looked like before, and that's what she looked like afterwards. The prince saw her and fell immediately in love with her, but she had to leave the party early before all of the magic wore off, her hair, her makeup, her clothes, and her transportation. But she left behind a glass slipper that the prince found. Now, if you've heard this story before, get ready because it's going to end differently. The prince went around the land looking for someone to fit the slipper. He found 3 women who had the same size foot, but he didn't recognize any of them as the woman he danced with at the ball. When he found the young lady in her house, she cowered and seemed meek, certainly not the self-assured woman from the ball. She looked like this. So which did the prince choose? These 3 women fit the slipper. Which one did he take? Did he take the woman behind door 1, door 2, or door 3? Just before he was about to choose one of the dark-haired women, the young lady's fairy godmother performed a miracle, and she turned into the woman the prince had fallen in love with at the ball. So instead of this, she became this. Not only did she look like a dreamboat, but she began walking and talking with more self-assurance. The prince immediately chose her for his princess, dumping the other 2 ladies, even though they fit the slipper. However, the fairy godmother was a bit of a trickster, and just as the prince was saying his final I do's, the fairy godmother changed the young lady back into what she looked like before the miraculous transformation. The fairy godmother then cussed the prince out for being so superficial and not recognizing her from her inner beauty instead of her outward appearance. The prince replied that he would have seen through her appearance if she had acted the same way she had at the ball. So it wasn't the fact that she looked different, it was the fact she acted different. That's what he was saying. It's not my fault. She didn't act like the woman at the ball. It was the way she acted. Context. Jean-Paul Sartre was a French philosopher who stated that we cannot be distinguished from our situations, for they form us and decide our possibilities. Just like the young lady, when she was at the ball and she was all dolled up, she acted one way. When she was the lady in the cinders with all the ashes on her face, she acted a totally different way. Herman Melville, and all do this. We all act differently when we are in different situations. I act differently when I'm walking around a campus than I do when I'm at home belching my way through the day. I certainly don't try to rip off a big belch when I'm around my students. Herman Melville stated that our lives are connected by 1,000 invisible threads. It is these invisible threads that social psychology tries to illuminate. So why in the world do we do this? Why don't we act the same all the time? Why don't we act the same around our parents and our grandparents that we do around our friends? It's a good thing we don't, because our parents would probably lock us in the garage and never let us out. Or maybe the attic, maybe the basement. You never know where you're going to get locked up, so you've got to be careful. Fiorina and Todd had been happily married for 3 years. Last Thursday, Fiorina got a really mean tone in her voice and shrewdishly said to Todd, "Can't you ever put the cap back on the toothpaste?" Todd assumed that Fiorina must have had a bad drive home from work. The problem was external. Fitch and Bodhi fought before they were married and had been unhappily sparring through the 3 years of marriage. One day Fitch said to Bodhi, "Can't you ever put the top back on the toothpaste?" Bodhi thought to himself as he put the top back on the toothpaste, "What is the word for someone who is unpleasant and always hostile? Oh yeah, Fitch." Later at dinner, Fitch asked Bodhi if the dinner was okay. He blew up anticipating a fight. He thought everything was internal. Bodhi did. Everything with Fitch was internal. As far as Fiorina and Todd were concerned, Todd assumed that Fiorina's anger or her negativity had to do with something that happened externally. So we can see things as either external or internal. They are always like this, or this is something new. Why are they acting this way? Social psychology is the scientific study of how people think about, influence, and relate to one another. Social psychology studies how we as individuals are influenced by others. Social psychology was defined by Gordon Allport, and this is a picture of Gordon. He had actually had a brother that also worked in social psychology, and we will talk about him in a moment. Thoughts are affected by actual presence of others. Feelings are affected by imagined presence of others. Behavior is affected by the implied presence of others. The concept, we are a social animal, and because we are a social animal, other people affect us. They change the way that we react to things. So even the anticipation that someone will be around changes the way that we behave. This may be the reason why if you saw a car with the keys in it, you were thinking, well, my grandfather would really be upset if I stole that car, so I'm not going to drive it away. The presence of others, even if it's an imagined presence of others. What is the difference between social psychology and sociology? Both fields are interested in social behavior. Psychology focuses on individual level variables, thought processes, emotional reactions, behavioral tendencies. Sociology focuses on group level variables, status, norms, social roles. So psychology looks at what's going on in the individual and why they act that way around other people. They're looking at the individual. Sociology just looks at the group. Sometimes what everyone knows is pretty accurate, but sometimes it isn't. You really can't tell the difference relying only on common sense. Social psychology uses science to find the most reliable rules about human thought, emotion, and behavior. Psychology is always looking for laws. It's always looking for something that happens every time. This is how we can predict what's going to happen next. This is one of the reasons why we're looking at why there are so many mass shootings these days. What is it that is causing these people to do what they do? To shoot a group of or at a group of people. Are they angry with those people? Is there something that those people represent that they want to eradicate? What's happening here? And this is what social psychology is doing. We're looking for rules or laws. Why are they doing this? Wilhelm Wundt argued for the development of social psychology in 1862. Wundt had the first psychological laboratory in Leipzig, Germany. And this is a picture of Wundt. He's the one sitting down. Everybody else gets to stand up. In 1896, Norman Triplett of Indiana University conducted the first social psychology experiment when he set out to prove that competition increased performance. And this is known as social facilitation. Triplett in 1898 set children winding a thread on a reel, sometimes on their own and sometimes against others. What he found confirmed his theory. The children went faster when in competition. So that was the first social psychology experiment. Norman Triplett in 1896 at Indiana University. Kids rolling up a reel. In 1924, Floyd Allport, the brother of Gordon, published an influential text on social psychology, Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, founded in 1936. And of course, he was the one that did it, he and his brother. It was just in time because the years following publication were fraught with world upheaval. Now remember, this is 1936. A lot of stuff was going on in 1936. Fascism had become the norm in Italy and then in Germany. And Germany, of course, had fought in World War I. They lost the war in World War I. And this was 1936. In 1939, World War II would start. And it would start. The Germans would be the ones to start it. But that wasn't all that was going on. In 1937, the Japanese invaded China and tried to take Manchuria and they did take the Manchuria from the Chinese. They also attacked the city of Shanghai, Nanking, I'm sorry, and the city of Nanking, and went berserk. They did things that people had never even thought of. They were decapitating captives, and they were bayoneting people to death, and they were raping and murdering and pillaging. It was a bloodbath, and no one had ever seen anything like this before. They were part of this fascist movement around the world, this nationalist movement, this Japanese nationalism, this Italian nationalism, this German nationalism. As a matter of fact, the Nazi Party stands for the Nationalist Socialist Party. Now, the socialist part of it didn't really have anything to do with what they believed, but the nationalism certainly did. Germany first is one of the things that they were saying. So there was fascism going on all around the world. They were being very aggressive, and it was the people that were not fascist who were asking all the questions. And that, of course, was the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues that Gordon and Floyd set up. The Great Depression, of course, was from 1929 until World War II ended the Depression. So we have 10 years of really ugly things going on. People starving to death, in the United States and around the world. So the Great Depression took place between 1929 and 1939. This led to the rise of fascism, as I said before. Of course, fascism actually started in Italy in the 1920s, in the early 1920s, and then it spread to Germany, and Hitler took over in Germany in 1932. So all of this was taking place. Franco in Spain, Mussolini in Italy, the military in Japan, and of course Hitler in Germany. Just after World War I, German psychologists Kurt Kafka, Max Wertheimer, and Wolfgang Köhler, students of Karl Stumpf, uh, shaped the concept of Gestalt psychology. And the reason I put Karl Stumpf in here isn't because Karl Stumpf is that important, but I had his great-great-granddaughter in class when I was teaching at Ashford. So I put that in there. I thought that was interesting. Gestalt emphasizes that the mind actively organizes stimuli into meaningful wholes. Gestalt sees a social environment not only made up of individuals, but also relations between individuals, relationships that have important psychological implications. Gestalt saw groups as social entities that led to the tradition of group processes and group dynamics. Now, a lot of people, they join groups. A lot of people will accumulate information, but they don't have all of the information. Yet they come up with conclusions from what they have seen. They have little pieces of information, they stick it all together, and they pretend that they understand what's going on. That's not what's happening. What is actually happening is they're getting partial information, and they are making decisions from that partial information, and that is part of Gestalt. Um, well, I don't have a picture of it. Well, let's show you. Let's keep going. That is Gestalt. Gestalt is getting pieces of information, um, creating a conclusion from incomplete information. Carl was a Navy SEAL. After he got out of the Navy, he confronted his sexuality and joined a local gay group in San Diego. Before Carl joined the group, the group would just sit around in a bar and complain about how they were being treated in the community. After Carl joined the group, members were more willing to admit their sexuality and they became more socially active. Why? Because a Navy SEAL had joined their group, and they knew that if they got into trouble, that Carl could take care of them because he was a Navy SEAL, and Navy SEALs are really good at fighting. Not that Carl wanted to hurt anybody, but it gave them the feelings that they could survive. After World War II, social psychology blossomed as research sought answers to problems of the day. Theodor Adorno and Stanley Milgram had influential research programs searching to explain Nazi atrocities. And if you don't understand what the Holocaust is, then you probably need to look into it, because the Holocaust is one of those things that has happened in human history that we need to be aware of, because it could potentially happen again. Individuals that people demonized they tried to exterminate all of them, all these demonized people. It was just bizarre, something that had never been seen. Well, we had seen it before, the genocide that was taking place. And of course, you need to understand what this Holocaust is all about. Leon Festinger developed a theory of cognitive dissonance, trying to explain how Germans could ignore the obvious. How did they ignore it? There was the smell of burning human flesh. How in the world did they just ignore the fact that it smelled like people were cremating all of these individuals? Kenneth Clark and Mamie Phipps Clark studied effect of segregation on self-concept of black children. These were all taking place. Ethical concerns spurred discussions and reform in the 1960s and 1970s. Protection of experimental participants from psychological distress became a concern following Milgram's obedience study and Zimbardo's Stanford prison study. And we will go into both of those studies as the class goes on. Institutional review boards were developed to meet this need. So they were doing experiments. These were psychologists that were doing experiments that were fairly unethical. They were not telling people why they were doing the experiment, and they were having these individuals harm other individuals. The world very much dictates to the social psychologist what it is that they will study. In the 1940s, prejudice seemed to grip the world, and it was the main topic of interest to social psychologists. In 1950s, it had to do with intolerance. Now remember, the Brown versus the Board of Education was not passed until 1955. Before that, the law of the land stated that black people were not as smart as white people. So there was a great deal of intolerance in the United States, especially when you're dealing with African Americans and the dominant white population. In the 1960s, it had to do with aggression. There was a lot of we were fighting in Vietnam. The Vietnam War started in 1963. We got into it more heavily in 1965. So aggression was really important as far as the 1960s were concerned. There were upheavals even in the United States with Kent State, and some of the civil rights was taking place at the same time. They were marching in the streets. A lot of things were going on. Aggression was extremely important. And then in the 1970s, because of the civil rights movement and because of the anti-war movement, feminism became very important. Women decided that they weren't being treated well. So feminism became important in the 1970s. In the 1980s, we realized that because the United States and the Soviet Union had accumulated so many atomic weapons that there was a possibility that all human life would end on Earth if there were ever a conflagration, or one that triggered the use of nuclear weapons. So the arms race was extremely important in 1980. And then, of course, in 1989, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the arms race was over with. And then in 1990s, the question came to that was being asked that dealt with diversity. 1950s intolerance and the intolerance of African Americans in the United States. They were the majority minority in the United States in the 1950s. Why were they being treated the way that they were treated? The law of the land said that schools didn't have to be equal, and that they didn't deserve equal rights to white people. In the 1960s, it had to do with the Vietnam War and aggression around the world. It wasn't just in the United States; it was also in Europe. There were wars going on in Africa. There were civil wars going on in South America. And in Central America, there was fighting going on everywhere. These little brush fire wars were taking place all around the world. So the 1960s, and of course we needed to figure out what the hell was going on, or the world was going to explode, and all people were we would start a third civil war, or a third world war if things didn't quiet down. In the 1970s, of course, we were dealing with feminism. This is NOW. My sister was one of the founding members of NOW in Indiana. They were asking for equality, and of course, there was no reason why equality couldn't. Why males were getting paid more money than females, why women were being treated unfairly, it just didn't make any sense. The 1980s, of course, we needed to stop the nuclear proliferation. In other words, the expansion of all of these nuclear weapons. We had way too many. We had way more than we needed. Than they needed, than anybody needed. And so the arms race ended in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed. In the 1990s, we were looking at diversity. We weren't just looking at the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. We were looking at diversity around the world. Why can't people get along? Just because somebody has a skin tone that's a little bit different, their hair texture is a little bit different, their eyes are not shaped the same. Why in the world can't people get along? In the 2000s, the most important issue seemed to have been terrorism. It started with the Twin Towers attack, the terrorist attack in 2001 on September 11th. Why in the world? And of course, then because of the Twin Towers attack, the United States went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. First Afghanistan and then Iraq. And of course, we were fighting world terrorism all around the world. Preconception, sometimes we think that we're looking at one thing and we're looking at something totally different. This is a waterfall that's coming down and then it turns into humans wearing white. Preconception. So is it water or is that just a mass of humans? This guy's playing his guitar on the roof and we have an audience out here, and then it starts out as houses and then all of a sudden the houses turn into humans. And this is an interesting picture. You have to count the horses. How many horses are we looking at? And the answer is we have one, we have two. There's the nose of a third, of a fourth, and a fifth. There are 5 horses. And okay, and this is a huge jigsaw puzzle. Is this individual in the jigsaw puzzle, or is she actual human is she 3-dimensional instead of 2-dimensional? That's the question. Though most scientists, and of course, we're talking about perception here, and of course, all of this has to do with perception: diversity, arms race, feminism, aggression, intolerance. We're looking at perceptions, how we see the world, and that's why I put these in here, so that you could count the horses. You got to count their noses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think. Yeah, 5. Though most scientists would like to deny it, it is nearly impossible for them to put their cultural values aside and view another culture or their own with an open mind. These commonly held values are known as social representations. We all have social representations. You probably have social representations of what white people are like, or what black people are like, or what Hispanics are like. And of course, all of those people probably have ideas of what American Indians are like if they acknowledge that they exist, as weird as that is. Now me, I've worked on 3 different reservations, so I have an idea. And it may be a fairly realistic idea, but of course, my idea of what American Indians are stems from the Northern Plains. That's the Gros-Ventre and the Assiniboine on the Fort Belknap Reservation, the Ani and Nakota people, and the mountain people, the Salish and Kootenai, are both mountain tribes in the Northwest. So I have an idea of what American Indians are in the Northwest, in the Northern Plains, and of course with the Dene people in the Southwest. I have ideas. I also have lived in Oklahoma. And in Oklahoma, I ran into individuals that were Kiowa, that were Ponca, that were Comanche, of course. I had a good friend that was Comanche. Anyway, so I have ideas. I've also lived in Mississippi, where the Choctaw live, or at least a group of Choctaw. Strangely enough, I lived in a town in Oklahoma where they had moved the Choctaw, and it was called Choctaw. So I'm lived in Choctaw, Oklahoma for 4 years. But I also lived in Mississippi, just north of the tribal lands of the Choctaw that didn't leave when they tried to kick them out. They hid in the swamps. Anyway, social representations. Two movements that have forced social scientists to acknowledge their social representations have been feminism and Marxism. Feminism has forced social scientists to question their Eurocentric idea of male dominance, and the Marxism has forced them to question the idea of difference to the rich and the powerful. And of course, it's easy to say rich people are rich because they are blessed, but you have to ask yourself why do they get all the money? I don't understand how that works. And that's Marxism. And then, of course, why is male domination? Why is the Eurocentric idea male dominated? When Europeans first came to the Americas, one of the things they were looking for was a chief. They were looking for a male leader, and of course, they couldn't accept a non-male leader because they were so Eurocentric. They were so stuck in their own way of thinking that they couldn't accept a female as a leader. Why is that? Well, one reason is because most Europeans follow a Christian ethic, and the Christian ethic is that the males are in charge. That's what the Bible says, by golly, so that must be true because the Bible was written by God, and therefore, well, you can see how this can be carried out through a lot of different sets of logic. Okay, I'm about to, no, I'm not. Social scientists in general and psychologists in particular are required to constantly decide what is right and what is normal. These are all value judgments, mature or immature, well-adjusted or poorly adjusted, mentally healthy or mentally ill. Now, these are pictures of individuals from the Irian and as you can see, this individual is wearing a penis sheath, and that is it. He's just wearing a penis sheath. And these individuals, that's it for them as well. Now, is that normal or is that not normal? In Irian Jaya, which is part of the island of Borneo, it's normal. It's normal. It's hot there. It's hot there. So why in the world would you wear clothes? And of course, this guy... these individuals feel like this is normal. Now we're going to get a little bit more controversial. Oh, there it is. Sorry, Irian Jaya. Wait a minute. I've lost it. Where are you, Irian? Oh, there it is, Irian Jaya. It's New Guinea, I'm sorry. Half of New Guinea is Irian Jaya. It's right over here. I'm blind, I guess. And the other part is known as Papua New Guinea. Okay, and Irian Jaya belongs to Indonesia. This is Indonesia, all these little tiny islands. And that is acceptable where in that part of the world? So is this acceptable? Here we have, and actually a teacher in Florida showed a picture. This is Michelangelo's David standing there without any clothes on. This is after he killed Goliath, I assume. But this is a very famous sculpture. Is this acceptable? Well, as far as the parents of the children that were seeing the sculpture, they didn't think it was. They were appalled by the fact that the teacher would show the children, even if it's art, doesn't make any difference. They were appalled that she would show that. This is a sculpture from, this is at the U.S. Capitol. As you can see, this is Justice. She's holding up her arms, and she doesn't have anything on her top. This is a picture from France, and this is a sculpture in France. She is one of the Greek goddesses, and as you can see, she doesn't have any clothes on. Neither does she, and neither does he. And of course, the question is, yes, this is art, but is it acceptable? Should we put clothes on sculptures that were made, that were sculpted nude? Uh, a strange and interesting question, I guess. 1992, Andrew. Okay, so you can decide what you think. Should we be covering up this lady's breasts at the Capitol building, even though it's art? Should we cover up this sculpture, even though it's not in the United States? This is in, where is it in Venice or Florence? It's in Florence. Should we not let people see this sculpture because of the, we can see the individual's penis and his testicles. And of course, should we go to Irian Jaya and tell those people, cover yourselves up, what's wrong with you? Okay. So you can ask yourself that question, and I'm going to tell you a story. Okay. 1992, Andrew Martinez began going to class au naturel at the University of California at Berkeley. At first, he was treated as a novelty at the liberal institution, but eventually he was arrested and expelled for breaking the school's ethics rules. This is him walking around naked. Because he took a class in sociology, and in that class they said that we create our own social norms. So he decided that he would start dressing. He would not dress. He would not put any clothes on. There's Andrew McCarthy. That's not his name. Andrew Martinez. There he is walking around campus. Here he is reading a newspaper. Donations for the something. Wait a minute. What are people donating to? To the Parenthood, no, Revolution. Donations for the Revolution. I don't know if it was a revolution against clothes. There he is with other naked people. Naked guy with the explicit players, and of course these are other people that didn't wear clothes. The naked guy, and that was his nickname. His nickname, the naked guy. Oh, okay. So the question you have to ask yourself, is this okay? Is this okay for this individual at this liberal institution to walk around naked? They fined him and they expelled him from school. He decided he would walk naked across the United States. He was arrested in Texas for indecent exposure. And he died in a jail in Texas. He died of some kind of a brain tumor, I think. You can look him up if you like, Andrew Martinez. Okay. So if this is not right, if we shouldn't be running around naked because this is indecent exposure, if this is not right, how about this? These are the Kurubo of the Amazon rainforest. It's hot down there. It's on the equator. They don't wear clothes. And how about Miley Cyrus and her famous wrecking ball? Was that okay? Okay, so these are all value judgments. If you think that nudity, nobody ever should be naked, then you would think that Miley Cyrus is obscene, that the Kurubo need to put their clothes on. Of course, this should never happen in the United States. That statues should never be uncovered, and that the people in Irian Jaya need to get a life and put some clothes on and stop wearing those strange penis sheaths. One reason why any psychological theory should be approached with a degree of skepticism is because the theory was developed utilizing a select scientist's value judgment. So if you think that everybody should put on their clothes, you can go down to the Amazon And talk to the Karubo and tell them they need to put clothes on. But by golly, that's a club, and and it's long. You better be really careful because he might just hit you in the head with that sucker if you tell him he's got to put on clothes and that his wife is obscene for wandering around without any clothes on. And you can tell Miley Cyrus anything you like, I guess. The naked guy is no longer with us, so we don't have to worry about him. I don't know about the explicit players. Of course, this was back in 1992, so that was, what, 30 years ago? I'm guessing those people don't look like that anymore, and they probably wear clothes. Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs is a perfect example. Maslow's heroes that he used to define his self-actualized individuals were all Jewish intellectuals who had escaped from Nazi Germany. So he put together this concept of the hierarchy of needs. We talk about it in social work. We talk about it in psychology. We talk about it in social psychology. Yes, first thing that you need to do is take care of people's food. Then you need to take care of their safety. Then you take care of love. And then you take care of, I can't remember what the next one is. And then the last one is social psychology. I'm sorry, is self-actualization. Okay, Abraham Maslow. Are these value judgments? Yes, he put it together. These are value judgments. Abraham Maslow was a fascinating guy. During World War II, they were trying to figure out a homeland for the Jewish population of the world. And there were all these Jewish people living in Poland, and Germany, and France, and Italy, and Hungary. There were just tons and tons of there were millions and millions of Jewish people, and they had no place to go. So they were trying to sneak into the Middle East, into Transjordan, into the Jerusalem area, in order to create a Zionist state. That was the idea. And Maslow was one of the individuals that was smuggling people into that area. And then when World War II started, Maslow came back to the United States and started working with escaped Jewish intellectuals, and that's where he came up with this theory. Nationalism versus patriotism. Moafik is from Afghanistan and wants to prevent the United States from destroying his country. He considers himself patriotic. Kyle is from Pittsburgh and not only backs the United States invasion as patriotic, but sees Moafik's position as blindly nationalistic. Kyle sees the invasion of Afghanistan as a patriotic endeavor to keep terrorists out of the United States. And of course, the September 11th terrorists did come out of Afghanistan. They were not from Afghanistan. 12 out of the 14 of them were from Saudi Arabia, as interesting as that is. But they came out of Afghanistan. These Saudis came out of Afghanistan. Open-ended marriages versus adultery. When Jocko married Simone, he told her from the start that he was not sure if he could stick with the monogamy thing. 3 years into the marriage, he came home early to find his wife having an affair with his bald next-door neighbor. He accused her of adultery and defended his own indiscretions as an agreed-upon open-ended marriage. It's okay for him to do it, but not for him to do it. Value judgments. Ambitious versus aggressive. Marlene and Marlon were after the same promotion at work. Both put in extra hours and put in a great deal of overtime. While both demanded a great deal from their workers, Marlene was branded as aggressive, while Marlon was seen as ambitious. No one wanted to work for an aggressive female, but they didn't mind working for an ambitious male. Timid versus cautious. Daryl and Daryl went to the same school and were in the same grade. Both were seen as shy when they were young. When they entered high school, Daryl was teased mercilessly as being cautious, while Daryl was seen as demure and ladylike for her timidity. So despite the fact that they were exactly the same, they were both timid because the male Daryl was not aggressive, he was seen as cautious. and she was seen as demure and ladylike. Perversions are sex acts that we do not practice. For a period of time, the Clinton-Lewinsky affair rocked the foundations of the U.S. government. Portions of the populace were appalled by perversions the two participated in. The myriad of jokes show their idea of normal. And of course, this was back in the 90s, so you probably don't remember any of this, but of course, I lived through it. Social science may many times will get caught between what is and what the scientists believe ought to be. This is known as naturalistic fallacy. When the missionaries first arrived in Hawaii, they found the rampant lack of clothes bad and the hula lascivious. They clothed the islanders and remade the hula in their own frumpish manner. And if you go to Hawaii today, and especially if you go to the they have a Mormon luau, and the women dancing at the Mormon luau dress in lots and lots of clothes. Now the reality is that Hawaiians, I'll tell you what, Hawaii is nice. Hawaii is always between the temperatures of 65 degrees and 85 degrees. I mean, it's perfect. You don't have to wear clothes. It would be perfect all the time if you just ran around naked. And that's what the Hawaiians did before Europeans got there. But of course, the missionaries came and they told them, oh, you're being obscene. You need to put clothes on. And some of them forced them to wear lots and lots of clothes. But they were naked before. And they were perfectly happy being naked. They're kind of like the guys from Irian Jaya. They didn't need clothes. It was too hot. And of course, so we're talking about value judgments. In the United States, the women show a lot of skin. Now women are wearing yoga pants, showing off the curves of their lower parts of their bodies. In the Muslim world, including Afghanistan, women have to stay completely covered except for their eyes. So which is right? Is this correct? Is this correct? Or are all people who don't dress like this whores? The question you have to ask yourself. The self is shaped by and shapes the social environment. The self is our social being that has the ability to use symbols to communicate with itself through self-awareness. Many self-awareness and symbol usage may have evolved as a means to deal with an increasingly complex social environment. Self-awareness allows people to reflect on their own actions as a means to understand what others might do. Communication allows people to coordinate activities. The self-serving bias, the tendency to take credit for success but deny responsibility for failure, affects our self-concepts and therefore affects the way that we respond to social events. We use it to protect our sense of self-worth. So if you have failed, it's perfectly natural for you to pretend that it didn't happen. If something is successful and people are giving you full credit when you don't deserve full credit, that's perfectly natural too, for you to accept full credit for your successes and none of the credit for the failures. Quarles probably drinks a little more than he should, and when he does, he becomes obnoxious and verbally abusive. Quarles has been married and divorced twice from women who everyone else saw as lovely and caring, but whom he refers to as harridans. A harridan is a word for a strict, bossy, or belligerent old woman. Quarles' description of his exes is a case of self-serving bias. He wants to see them that way because he was not able to maintain his marriage to them. If you listen to the song Margaritaville, and if I play it, sadly I can't play it because if I do, it's a copyright infringement. But I invite you to listen to Margaritaville and listen to the individual in the song, how he changes, how his ideas change over time as he is discussing why he is having problems why he broke up with his girlfriend and why he's still in Margaritaville rather than out doing something constructive. Steps on a flip flop and blew out his. No, he steps on a pop top, blew out his flip flop. The great Danish philosopher and theologian Soren Kierkegaard once said, "Life is lived forwards, but it's understood backwards." This is one reason why, when people are given information, they tend to think that it was knowable all along, or it should have been common sense. This is also known as the "I knew it all along" phenomenon, or hindsight bias. And the reality is, of course, it's easy to see how things should have been if we look backwards, not if we look forwards. This is how I want it to be. Maybe I should have done this. The United States dominant culture emphasizes uniqueness and individuality. More of the millennial generation says they are unique than previous generations. Also more tolerant of others' differences than previous generations. So the millennials are more tolerant than people have been in the past. Individualism takes care of self and immediate family only. They pursue their own goals. They don't like being influenced by a group. Collectivism, on the other hand, is a group of individuals that take care of others within their group. The group goals are more important than the individual goals. They accept group influences. So if you were to talk about the Navajo Nation, you'd probably call them collectivistic. If you were talking about the most white people in Arizona or wherever, or New Mexico, you would probably say that they're more individualistic. About 70% of the world's population lives in societies with strong collectivist philosophies. But that doesn't include the United States, Australia, Canada, and most of Europe. The goal of evolutionary psychology is to look for explanations for behavioral universals. This discipline seeks how these behaviors might have enhanced odds of reproductive success. In other words, how do I need to act to be able to find a mate and to be able to reproduce? What do I need to do? These are the universal norms that we're looking for. If we look at, wait a second, let me see if I've done. I'm teaching the same thing in 3 or 4 different classes. Oh, I can't remember what aids I have. Okay, just a second. Let me take a quick drink. Okay, let me give you a quick example. So we got males, we have females. How in the world does the male or the female select their mate? Now, if we were pheasants, wait a minute. If we were of the pea family, the pea birds, the pea hens and peacocks, in order for if I were a pea hen, I would select the male with the largest tail. If I were a cardinal, if I were a female cardinal, I would select the male that was the reddest. If I were human and I were female, who would I select? Would I select the little short guy, or would I select the big tall guy? Well, if it's a basketball culture, the taller you are, probably, the better a basketball player that you potentially are. Of course, if we're talking about three-point shots, then it probably isn't the tall guy that you'd be looking at. But, of course, these are all the things that we have to look at. So it's reproductive. It has to do with reproduction. If, as humans, we decided that the longest nose was the most attractive, then humans would evolve with longer and longer and longer noses until potentially we would look like elephants. And this is just an example. Why do some people have large chests? Why do some women have large breasts? Is this important? Was this something that a group of males decided that this was what they needed for reproduction? Height, as far as males are concerned, thin, fat. All of these things have gone in and out of fashion over time. And this is what we're talking about in evolutionary psychology. Remember that individuals don't evolve. Populations evolve over many generations. In other words, I'm 5'6". I wear size 12 shoes. What is it about me that what can I change to be able to find a mate? That's the question. I already have 2 children. I'm not worried about it. I'm 73 years old. I'm beyond that. But the question is, if I were only 30 years old and I had never reproduced, what would I need to do in order to be acceptable to someone to be able to reproduce? Would I need to change my shoes because my shoes they're too big? You don't want to see somebody that's 5'6" with a size 12 shoe. That doesn't make any sense. Would I need to wear smaller shoes? Would I need to put lifts in my shoes in order to look taller? Is 5'6" too short? These are things that we all look at. This is something that evolutionary psychologists might look at. A trait that, and of course, it is spring, and so I live in an area with a lot of birds, and I'm watching red-winged blackbirds and cardinals and robins and goldfinches and blue jays, and I'm wondering how in the world do they know who to mate with? We have a pair of mating swans up the hill from where I live, in a pond, and you have to wonder what is it that the female is looking for in a male that allows that male to be the one that she mates with. You walk around Walmart, you see families, and you ask yourself, what is it about her or him that attracted one of them to the other? They don't look like they match. I was looking at a couple coming into at the gas station the other day, and I was thinking they don't match. They don't really go together very well. Are there universal norms that force people together? The big tail for the peacock, the red feathers for the cardinal. What are we looking at? And that's what evolutionary psychology is trying to determine. Now, the reality is that these things change over time. I can remember if a male had long hair, then he was not he was considered he's too girly. That's not somebody that anybody would be attracted to. I can remember when what else besides the long hair. Uh, I can't think of another example. Anyway, over time, all of these things change over time, as interesting as that is. So norms change over time. They do evolve, but humans can't. We can't really change ourselves. I'm never going to be 6'2". I'm only 5'6". My feet are never going to be any smaller than size 12. Actually, they're 12s and a halves. So I'm not bragging, I guess. A trait that may have been adaptive at one point may persist and become maladaptive as the environment changes. And you can imagine if you've ever watched a peacock try to fly with that huge tail, you know that doesn't happen. He has to hop from one place to the other. And if he wants to get onto the top of the barn, he has to fly up to the roof, and then he has to fly up to the peak of the roof, and then he has to fly to the top. That's the only way he can do it. He can't fly directly from the ground up to the top of the roof because his tail is just too heavy. Sex is the biological state of being male or female. That is whatever plumbing that you have. Gender is the psychological state of being masculine or feminine, your way of relating to the world. Now, once upon a time, sex and gender, people would get them mixed up all the time. They said that they were exactly the same thing. Your plumbing is your gender. But of course, now we know that with the liberalization of society, we have changed the concept of gender. so that it is far more liberal than it ever has been in the past. And this is kind of interesting, the way to watch how all of these things change over time. Social neuroscience examines relationships between social and neural processes. Social neuroscience helps us understand which cognitive processes are involved in specific behavior. This discipline has developed to study relationships between neural processes and social processes. The development of functional MRIs and PET scans have helped spur collaboration between neuroscience and social psychology. These new imaging techniques measure a level of metabolism in regions of the brain and individual cells in the brain. Evolutionary psychology looks to explain social behaviors that appear to be cultural universals. Topics studied by evolutionary psychologists include aggression, helping, interpersonal attraction, love, and stereotyping. Caution has been raised about how to apply evolutionary principles to contemporary behaviors. Positive psychology is an emerging perspective in social psychology. Positive psychologists attempt to focus on positive aspects of human functioning to increase well-being. Positive psychology's main emphasis is to teach people to avoid harmful self-deceptions while still maintaining a sense of realistic optimism about life. Morality is one of the areas focused on by positive psychologists. These psychologists focus on standards of right and wrong to understand how moral judgments help or hinder social relations. And there has been a movement in positive psychology since the year 2000. Before 2000, all we looked at in psychology, primarily we looked at pathology. We were looking at why things don't work as well as they should. Mental illness is what we were focusing on. Now we are trying to determine how we can promote happiness, how we can promote positive feelings. So let's go ahead and go to chapter 2. That's about research. And of course, each of you will be doing, well, if you choose to do it, each of you will be doing some research in social psychology. It's really fascinating, all of the titles. Pick, just go wild and pick the strangest one or the one that sounds like it's nothing close to the way that you think. It's really going to be interesting because some of the titles say one thing, but the research is actually about something totally different. Remember deception. I guess that was another class. Okay, research done in social psychology follows a scientific method. The first thing that you do is gather information. The next thing that you do is analyze that information. And the third thing that you do is interpret that information. The social psychologist first observes a phenomenon. They read existing literature on the topic, and then they develop a theory about the phenomenon. A theory is an integrated set of principles that explains and predicts observed events. While basic research can be characterized as research that is not applicable but advances scientific knowledge, applied research increases the understanding of and solutions to real-world problems by using current knowledge. Basic and applied research can inform each other, leading to greater scientific progress. From the theory, the scientist develops hypotheses. Hypotheses are testable propositions that describe a relationship that may exist between events. Hypotheses allow us to test a theory by suggesting how we might try to falsify it. Hypotheses give direction to research. Because hypotheses are predictive, they tend to also be more practical. Ethical concerns about the study must be addressed, including whether use of deception is justified. Institutional review boards protect the safety and well-being of study participants because IRBs require adherence to specific guidelines, including the idea of informed consent. The independent variable is manipulated by the researcher. It is the variable presumed to cause the change in the other variable. The dependent variable is the one measured by the researcher to see if changes depend on the level of the independent variable. And right now I'm going to tell you about the research that I did to get my PhD after I take a drink. At the time that I was working on my PhD, I was living on the Fort Belknap Reservation, and I had lots of friends who had problems in the past. They had used drugs or they had drunk alcohol to excess over a number of years, but they had recovered from all of these things. And I was thinking, it's kind of silly. It would be kind of silly for me to do research on negative things. Why in the world would I talk about the alcohol that the problems they had with alcohol, or why would I talk about crystal meth? They were having a meth problem in the Northern Plains at the time. I said, these are really nice people, and look how resilient they are. They have recovered from all of these problems. So that's what I decided to do. I decided to measure resilience. And I asked myself, well, what is so resilience was my dependent variable. That was what I was looking at. So I asked myself, well, what is it that makes people resilient? Is it the fact that they have a strong culture? Is it the fact that they have not had very much trauma in their life? Is it the fact that they are educated? Is it the fact that they're old? Or is it the fact that they're a male or a female? Are these variables that would cause people to be resilient? And so those were my five independent variables: level of culture, level of education, whether it was a male or a female, age, and the last had to do with trauma. Okay, so that's my own research. Experiment is not just another word for study. It has particular meaning. The experimenter manipulates the independent variable. They use random assignment to put people in groups or conditions. They measure the dependent variable. They control all other variables as much as possible. And of course, mine was not this type of research. I didn't do an experiment. I used surveys. The groups are equivalent at the start of the experiment. Like I said, this doesn't have anything to do with my research. They experience different levels of the independent variable. They don't experience any other differences because everything else is controlled. So if the groups are different at the end of the study, it can only be because of the difference in levels of the independent variable. Now let me give you another example. When I was living in the Washington, D.C. area in Vienna, Virginia, I worked at a pediatrics clinic. And the doctor that I worked for was doing research in otitis media, which is an ear infection. So he was looking at different antibiotics to see which one was the best at combating the common cause of otitis media, or middle ear infections. So in his case, they actually did that. A child would come in, they would ask them if they wanted to be part of the study. If the parents agreed, then they would become part of the study, and he would give them an antibiotic. But he didn't know which antibiotic he was giving them. He didn't know if he was giving them the one that had been used for years, or which was penicillin, or whether it was the new antibiotic. They didn't know. But they agreed to go ahead and try the medications. So there were two groups. There was a control group who used the old medication, and then there was the experimental group. That was the group using the new antibiotic to see if there was a difference between the two groups. Internal validity refers to making sure that nothing else besides the independent variable can affect the dependent variable. And of course, as far as internal validity was concerned, with the otitis media, they were not taking any other antibiotics. This is accomplished by controlling all extraneous variables and by randomly assigning people to different experimental conditions. And of course, in this case, they weren't taking any other antibiotics, and that's what they were measuring. Internal validity is established by controlling all extraneous variables and by using random assignment conditions. And of course, we were using random assignment conditions. Even with random assignment, there is a small probability that different characteristics of people are distributed differently across conditions. To guard against misinterpreting results, scientists calculate the probability level, or the p-level, that their results would occur by chance. External validity is the extent to which the results of a study can be generalized to other situations and other people. Now, the group that we were working with were pediatrics. In other words, they were children. The reality is that adults don't very often get otitis media or ear infections because their ear canals are much longer than the child's is. And that's why the child, especially when they're very young, they develop ear infections. As soon as their head grows and that ear canal stretches, then the bacteria has a much more difficult time getting into the middle ear. Mundane realism is the extent to which an experiment is similar to real-life situations, and of course this was very, very real because it was real life. Psychological realism is the extent to which the psychological processes triggered in an experiment are similar to the psychological processes that occur in everyday life. And of course, the psychological realism of my research on the Fort Belknap Reservation was there was psychological realism because we were using we were measuring the resilience that they actually had. Field experiments, more natural setting lead to easier generalization. Less control leads to less assurance about cause and effect. Now, this wasn't a hospital setting where we were doing the antibiotic research. It was not an experiment in a laboratory. No, we were taking people off the street, and we were giving them surveys. We were just asking them questions. So it was a natural situation. Lab experiments are unnatural settings that may limit their generalizability. It's easier to control, leads to stronger causal claim, and of course, we weren't doing lab experiments. However, we had two flu epidemics when I was working in the pediatrics clinic, and we were trying to determine if we had flu tests. We had 15-minute flu tests, and we were trying to determine if they were accurate. So what we did, we took a sample from an individual, and we measured it with each of the, I think we had five different flu tests to see if they said that person was positive. And if any of them said it was positive, we would take that specimen and we would send it off to the state laboratory, and they would tell us if the individual actually had flu or not. And that was actually a lab experiment. And we were able to control everything except whether it was positive or negative. So that was a good lab experiment. And the flu test that you'd use today is probably one of the flu tests that we were experimenting on. And this was in 2000, 2001. Virtual environment technology. Early studies suggest a promising combination of realism and control in virtual environment technology. This is something that's on the computer. They create scenarios and they test it that way. Web-based studies recruit many people. They run studies remotely, cheaply, and easily. Non-representative samples, but so are psych students or any college student. The web-based studies. That is what you're going to be doing when you go to the social psychology site and do their surveys. You're doing web-based studies. Implicit measures are reporting what people don't know reporting what people don't know they think. brain imaging techniques, implicit measures. There is one experiment that is an implicit measure, and we'll talk about that. We may talk about that this semester. Okay, let's talk about some science in action. Dr. Belvedere observed that his female students complained about their boyfriends more than they did their husbands, while men complained more about their wives, but they rarely complained about their girlfriends. So women were complaining about their boyfriends, but not their husbands. And men were complaining about their wives, but not their girlfriends. Now, it's not like a guy had both a girlfriend and a wife. That's not what we're talking about. The guys who were married complained about their wives. The guys that weren't married didn't complain about their girlfriends. The women that were married complained about their husbands, or complained about the women who were married didn't complain about their husbands, but the women who weren't married complained a lot about their boyfriends. Dr. Belvedere theorized that women treat men differently when they are dating than when they are married. This made women complain more about before the wedding and men to complain more after the wedding. Belvedere hypothesized that women believe that if they marry a man, they will be able to change all of his faults. He also hypothesized that men believe that if they marry their girlfriend, things will remain the same as they were when they were dating. So women think they're going to change the men, and men think that the women are going to stay the same after they get married. Social psychology uses 4 approaches for research. Field research is done in natural, real-life settings outside the laboratory. Laboratory research is done in the laboratory. Correlational research compares 2 or more variables, usually from a field study, and experimental research manipulates 1 or more variables in a controlled setting. Belvedere decided to do a preliminary meta-analysis study on his hypothesis and found that studies from the 50s and 60s showed that women during that era rarely complained about men. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the studies showed increasing complaints about men. Now remember, as we just found out, the feminist movement was in the 70s, and women are starting to complain about men in the 70s. Belvedere decided to bring a group of subjects into the lab and give them a fictional scenario that the individuals would have to respond to. He discovered that men expected women to try to change them after marriage, and women felt compelled to try to change men. The observational method involves systematic observation and measurement of behavior. Ethnography is a type of observational method used by cultural anthropologists and social psychologists to study and understand a group or culture. Participant observation, a form of systematic observation, whereby the observer interacts with the people being observed, but tries not to change the situation in any way. So we have 3 different types: observational method, ethnography, and participant observation. Belvedere's next step was to put together a field study approach. He hired 25 males and 25 females to keep a diary of all their conversations over the 2-week period. They were not allowed to steer any conversation toward the topic. Women complaining about men and men complaining about women. There were not enough episodes of people complaining about the opposite sex to make any determination, so Belvedere decided to allow the people to bring the topic up in conversation. He was going to manipulate that variable, see if he could get people to talk about their spouses or their significant others. Interjudge reliability, the level of agreement between 2 or more people who independently observe and code a set of data. Archival analysis is a form of observational method whereby the researcher examines the accumulated documents of a culture. They look at the documented information from the past. When researchers decide to do research, they determine a population that they are going to perform the research on. The population could be as large as the world population or the people taking social psychology at Diné College. A random sample is a survey procedure where every person in the population being studied has an equal chance of inclusion. By only allowing a college or prison population to be surveyed, a researcher is creating an unrepresentative sample. Meta-analysis examines the outcomes of many studies. Meta-analysis is a statistical technique used to combine information from many empirical studies in a single topic to objectively estimate the reliability and overall size of the effect. Meta-analytic researchers try to include non-published studies to avoid the file drawer effect. Since findings from a single study are less convincing than findings from a series of studies, a meta-analysis can provide a clear statement of the state of research on a topic. So what is the file drawer effect? The file drawer effect is if your research doesn't pan out, if it doesn't do what you thought it was going to do, then most people don't publish it. They just stick it in a drawer. They just file it away. And sadly, of course, if other people knew that this didn't work, they wouldn't try it themselves. So we have this whole episode of people trying coming up with a hypothesis that they try out and it doesn't work, and nobody publishes. And since nobody publishes, then they just keep doing it because people think this sounds like it might be a good idea. A researcher can prejudice his sample by using an unrepresentative sample. Other ways of prejudicing the results of the survey include order of questions, limited response options, question wording, demand characteristics, subtle cueing of the participant to answer in a desired way. Participant observation is a subset of naturalistic observation. The researcher joins the group being studied as a participant. A classic example of this type of research is the study of a doomsday cult by Leon Festinger and colleagues in 1956. After infiltrating the cult, Festinger and his colleagues chronicled the cognitive dissonance of the cult leader and followers when the world didn't end 21 December in 1956. One reason that laboratory research is so widely used in science is because variables can be controlled. The variable that is manipulated or controlled by the researcher is known as the independent variable. The variable that is tested or measured is known as the dependent variable. Doing research on people who are not aware what the experiment is about is not ethical. So they need to know what it's all about. And this is referred to as informed consent. Deception is misleading participants about the true purpose of the study. Debriefing is explaining to participants at the end of an experiment the true purpose of the study. Now, you may run into deception in your as you're doing research on the social psychology website. The correlational method involves systematically measuring the relationship between two or more variables, for example, how much one can be predicted from the other. The correlation coefficient is a statistic that assesses how well you can predict one variable from another. Correlational research assesses the direction and strength of the relationship between variables. Correlational research is designed to examine the nature of the relationship between two or more variables not controlled by the researcher. Correlations are used for prediction. If you know the value of one variable, you can predict the value of the other. Correlation coefficient measures linear relationships between two variables, and the range is between +1 and -1. So it's a range of 2 because it goes from -1 to +1. And that is, there's 1 in the -1 and then there's 1 in the +1. So if you add the two together, you get 2. So 0 is very important. It's right in between -1 and 1. Strength is indicated by magnitude, absolute value. Direction is indicated by the plus or the minus sign. Negative correlations indicate that an increase in the one variable is associated with a decrease in the other. A positive correlation indicates that an increase in one variable is associated with an increase in the other. And this is what a positive correlation looks like if you use a scatter plot to plot it. This is no correlation, it's all over the map. And this is a negative correlation, it goes in the other direction. Correlations at or near zero may mean no relationship between variables or a curvilinear relationship. Social science correlations rarely exceed 0.6 because most behavior is influenced by many, many different variables. And so 0.6 is about as good as you can get. When two variables are related or correlated, there is a natural tendency to assume one causes the other. However, there are problems in assuming a cause. Third variable problems, it is very difficult to isolate only two variables. Reverse causality problem, which variable is the cause and which is the effect. The correlational method identifies only whether two variables are associated and not why they are related. The correlational method often relies on surveys as well as on observational data. Surveys are used when the variable of interest is not easily observable. Let me give you an example. As crime goes up, ice cream sales go up, as weird as that may sound. So whenever you see ice cream sales going up, you can be sure that the crime rate will go up. So why is this? What in the world's going on? What does ice cream have to do with crime? Well, ice cream really has nothing at all to do with crime. The reason that the ice cream sales go up is because when it's hot, ice cream sales go up. When it's hot, crime rates go up. But the two have nothing at all to do with each other. But we can draw a correlation between those two. And of course, as social scientists, we need to look at the different aspects of a statement to see if ice cream, so we should ban ice cream in the United States because it causes crime. No, that doesn't make any sense at all. But people are saying as much silly stuff. And we need to be the ones to determine whether that is right or whether that is wrong. So, in Mississippi, they're going to start banning ice cream because crime rates go up when ice cream sales go up. Well, that doesn't make any sense at all because ice cream and crime, the only similarity between the two has to do with the variable of heat. As it gets hotter, crime rates go up. Surveys are structured sets of questions used to measure attitudes, beliefs, values, or behavioral tendencies. Four major survey techniques are face-to-face, written, phone, and computer surveys. Format, delivery system, and question phrasing are aspects of a survey that must be carefully considered. The qualitative method investigates the why and the how of social science, not just what, where, and when. Hence, smaller but focused samples are more often used than large samples. If a researcher should find an instrument that quantified a feeling or an idea, used a Likert or Likert type scale, it is a quantitative research. So if we're saying on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being not at all and 5 being very much, how much do you like ice cream? We could, and we're talking about like here. How much do you like ice cream? Are you a 1, 2, 3, 4, or a 5? Do you think it's the greatest thing in the whole wide world? And we're just talking about levels of like. So if we did this survey over 100 people, we would probably get somewhere in the 3.5 to 4 range because almost everybody likes ice cream unless they're lactose intolerant. So that would give us a feeling because we're talking about liking here, okay? Because of lack of control of variables, it is difficult to impossible to determine cause. All you see is the effect. Observer bias is a second problem. Preconceived ideas held by the researcher affects the nature of the observations made. The presence of an observer may change the behavior of the sample, and they may not act authentically, but in a manner they think the observer desires. There may be a question of invaded privacy. Okay, so we're going to watch a YouTube about Milgram. This is kind of long. Okay.
In a unique period from the early 60s to the early 70s, a group of social scientists conducted a series of experiments examining the nature of human behavior and its relationship to social conventions and situations.
In this setting, I allow things to be done to me that I wouldn't allow in any other context. The dentist is about to put an electric drill into my mouth. In this setting, I willingly expose my throat to a man with a razor blade.
Stanley Milgram, one of the most influential social psychologists of the time, was particularly fascinated with the dangers of group behavior and blind obedience to authority.
What is there in human nature that allows an individual to act without any restraints whatsoever, so that he can act inhumanely, harshly, severely, and in no way limited by feelings of compassion or conscience? These are questions.
But he might be dead in there. The experiment requires that you continue to 330 volts.
The experiments that Milgram and others conducted were controversial, and for ethical reasons may never be conducted again. Yet the results of those experiments remain groundbreaking, profoundly revealing about the tensions between the individual and society, and increasingly relevant to contemporary life. In 1962, Stanley Milgram shocked the world with his study on obedience. To test his theories, he invented an that would become a window into human cruelty. In ascending order, a row of buttons marked the amount of voltage one person would inflict upon another. Milgram's original motive for the experiment was to understand the unthinkable, how the German people could permit the extermination of the Jews.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, who are courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? And there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different. It went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience? These are exactly the questions that I wanted to investigate at Yale University.
It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area.
Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake.
40 years later, Milgram's infamous experiment, obedience, is still taught in classrooms around the world.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. All right, now the next thing we'll have to do is set the learner up so that he can get some sort of punishment.
What inspired Milgram, I would say there were a number of factors. One of them is he was very ambitious. He wanted to make a mark in social psychology. And he wanted, as he wrote to one friend, he wanted to come up with the boldest experiment that he could think of.
Would you roll up your right sleeve, please? This electrode is connected to the shock generator in the next room. And this electrode paste is to provide a good contact to avoid any blister or burn. Do you have any questions now before we go into the next room?
About 2 years ago, I was at the Veterans Hospital in West Haven.
Mm-hmm.
And while there, they detected a heart condition. Nothing serious. But as long as I'm having these shocks, how strong are they? How dangerous are they?
Well, no, although they may be painful, they're not dangerous. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
No, that's all.
All right, teacher, would you take the test and be seated in front of the shock generator, please, in the next room?
But the experiment was rigged.
The victim was an accomplice of the experiment. The victim, according to plan, provided many wrong answers. His verbal responses were standardized on tape, and each protest was coordinated to a particular voltage level on the shock generator.
Now, as teacher, you were seated in front of this impressive-looking instrument, the shock generator. Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of verbal designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and finally XXX, danger severe shock. Your job, the experimenter explains to you, is a word pair test. If he gets each answer correctly, fine, you move on to the next pair. But if he makes a mistake, you are instructed to give him an electric shock, starting with 15 volts, and you increase the shock one step on each error.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105. Hard head. Just how far can you go in this thing? As far as is necessary. What do you mean, as far as is necessary?
Milgram was very much aware that obedience is a necessary ingredient for society to function. But he focused on the darker side of obedience.
Incorrect. 150 volts. Sad face.
Wait a minute. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now.
It's absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice, teacher. Oh, I have a lot of choices. My number one choice is that I wouldn't go on if I thought he was being harmed.
Now, this man makes disobedience seem a very rational and simple deed. Now, other subjects respond quite differently to the experimenter's authority.
Wrong. It's hair. 75 volts, Jim. You don't know. Please continue.
Some psychologists were troubled by the ethics of it. Many, if not most subjects, found it a highly stressful, conflicted experience. People are stammering, stuttering, laughing hysterically and inappropriately.
150 volts.
Experiment. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please. Let me out of here. You have no right to keep me here. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me.
Go on.
Out. Let me out.
Clearly, when we say people went to the top of the shock board, it wasn't like they were going blithely, sadistically. People went stop and go, stop and go. They were in a state of conflict, which was created a tremendous amount of stress. So that was the main critique.
This will be at 3:30.
As his voice began to show increasing frustration, so did I. And I was really in a state of real conflict and agitation. One of Stanley Milgram's basic contributions was that you don't ask people what they would do given this hypothetical situation. You put them in the situation.
Wrong. I want the 180 volts. Please continue, teacher. 180 volts.
I can't stand the pain. Let me out of here.
Stand it. I'm not going to kill that man. There.
According to Milgram, one of the things that's a prerequisite for carrying out acts that are evil is to shed responsibility from your shoulders and hand it over to the person in charge.
You know who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one, slow.
He didn't hold any gun to anybody's head. Just the fact that he conveyed a sense of authority. Roughly 60-65% of the people went all the way to the top of the shock board.
450 volts. That's it.
Now continue using the last switch on the board, please. The 450 switch for each wrong answer. Continue, please.
I'm not getting no answer. Don't the man's help mean anything?
Whether the learner likes it or not,
But he might be dead in there.
Milgram made the point, I think, very effectively, that the Nazis weren't all a bunch of psychopaths at Belsen and Dachau. A death camp from the middle class in New Haven.
Well, who's actually pushing the switch?
I was. But he kept insisting. I told him no, but he said he's got to keep going.
What kind of obedience would Milgram get today if he were to do the experiment today?
Probably about the same.
Probably about the same. Why?
I don't know. I think people are just inherently obedient.
It just really shows like how far human beings will go to appease what they perceive to be an authority figure.
Milgram has identified one of the constants, one of the universals of social behavior, the readiness to obey authority, cuts across time. It's a constant. The other outstanding and distinctive thing about the obedience experiment is how much it has and keeps on permeating contemporary culture and thought. It's still with us in very, very important ways.
Interesting. Okay, so was he ethical or unethical? That's a question that you have to ask yourself. Was he being he found out something that no one had known up to that point, but was it ethical for him to do that? Questionable practices in research include deception, misinforming the participants about the true nature of the research. This is done so that the responses of the participant is closer to real world reactions, and that's what we were seeing in the Milgram experiment. A confederate is using a trained member of the research team as part of the sample to deceive the participant to act in a certain way. Now, the interesting thing about Milgram's experiment is that he died not very long after the experiment was done. Is that right? No. He died fairly young. He was only 51 when he died, so really kind of interesting. They couldn't interview Milgram. They had to interview his confederate, or the individual that was acting like the person that was being shot. And that is the end of our lecture. So was Milgram ethical? You can answer that question yourself. So I'll talk to you again next week. We'll tackle chapter 3, I believe. So have fun. You have a research to do.